and a couple of dollars, you know, you could be saved, you know?
We hope, after we send them out the door, that they understand that we know that they have the glandular secretions working, but they have to learn how to say no.
Parents who abrogate the privilege and obligation of teaching human development and sexual relationships to their children should not complain about somebody else who takes over their obligation.
There are people who legitimately are very upset whenever you mention anything about condoms or birth control. And I can appreciate they don't want their children having sexual relations before marriage. But I think that they also are coming around to realize that you don't want them to have a death penalty for making a mistake.
Somehow it seems that peers now, they act like they're not afraid to get AIDS, and they know it's around because they're still running around with their boyfriends and girlfriends, having sex and all. And my opinion, I don't think it's scaring them, but I know a lot of them are worried about it, but I don't think it affects them that much.
There's nothing more important to me in this world than my children. The idea that a disease that is threatening their lives will continue to do so and will be somehow aided in continuing to do so because other people are afraid to hear the truth, speak the truth, and somehow act on the truth makes me furious.
Serving. As many parents know, teenagers are always asking for something. May I go to the dance on Friday? Can I spend next weekend at the beach? And may I please borrow the keys to the car? These are always interesting questions to deal with, but today kids are starting to ask their parents about something much more serious than borrowing the family car. They're beginning to ask questions about AIDS. The transmission of this devastating disease by the sharing of IV drug needles and through sexual contact is running unchecked throughout our society. And this includes our kids. Unless we do something and do it soon, AIDS could become the Vietnam for a whole generation of our children. As parents, we must be prepared to answer our children's questions about AIDS. And parents and kids must learn to communicate openly and knowledgeably about the disease. The program you're about to see will introduce you to the problems of AIDS in teenage America, and I hope that parents and children will sit down together for the next hour and pay close attention. We're going to learn firsthand what AIDS is already doing to our young people, and we're going to discover what we, as parents and teens, can do about it. There is a way out of this real threat to all of us. There is hope for a safe and healthy future if we teach our children well.
When most Americans first heard of AIDS, it was in the early 80s, and at the time, we heard that it was a disease that plagued primarily the gay communities of this country. Soon, there was evidence that IV drug users who shared needles were also becoming infected with the virus. Then it was discovered that blood donated by people with the virus had infected other people who had required blood transfusions. More recent evidence shows that the virus can be passed from person to person through sexual contact, which means that you don't have to be gay or shooting drugs or a hemophiliac in order to be at risk of getting AIDS. Today, the virus can invade any part of our society, but especially vulnerable are our young people. That's because teenagers and adolescents are the last relatively uninfected segment of the population. They're also at a rebellious age when many will begin to experiment with sex and drugs, the very kind of high-risk behaviors that could lead to AIDS. But since teenagers are still pretty much disease-free, they're the perfect group to target for the kind of educational effort that could prevent the spread of AIDS. It's an effort that society cannot afford to pass up. When the sexually transmitted nature of AIDS became apparent, it was clear that AIDS was not a gay disease, and that any so-called straight person with multiple sex partners, and multiple here means more than one, could become a conduit for spreading AIDS into the general population. And that means big cities and small towns alike. Today, AIDS is no longer a problem just of our urban metropolitan centers. Even here in the rural heartland of the country, the tragedy of AIDS can and has been felt. You see, AIDS is primarily a sexually transmitted disease, and given the incredible mobility of our population and the fact that people will continue to have sex, well, there was no reason to believe that AIDS wouldn't eventually spread to all parts of the country. In the next hour, we'll show you that there are very few ways to be totally safe from this dreaded disease, regardless of where you live and regardless of how old you are. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's caused by a deadly virus that upon entering the bloodstream begins to destroy the body's natural immune system. The AIDS virus is a killer because it leaves the body defenseless. There is no vaccine, no pill, no cure. When the virus enters the bloodstream, the body's first reaction to the invader is normal. A special blood cell detects the virus and sends out chemical warning signals which activate the white blood cells, called T cells, whose job is to destroy any intruder. But here, things begin to go wrong when the virus takes the offensive. It attaches to the T cells and enters them. The virus then takes over the T cells and multiplies. As the T cells are destroyed, many more of the AIDS viruses are spewed out into the bloodstream to repeat the process, and the immune system grows weaker. When another line of defense called B cells arrive, they produce an antibody, but they're not effective in killing the AIDS virus. Those antibodies remain in the system, but so does the virus, which continues to multiply and destroy the T cells, which normally mount the first attack against foreign invaders. By the close of 1982, the Centers for Disease Control recorded slightly more than 1,000 cases of AIDS in this country. By November 19th of 1987, the centers reported a total or cumulative number of AIDS cases as more than 46,000. It is estimated that by 1991, the cumulative number of AIDS cases in the United States will total more than 250,000. By then, at least 179,000 people will have died of AIDS. The best way of understanding AIDS and preventing it from destroying your life is through education. Sadly, the people who are best at telling us what AIDS is really like are people with AIDS. When we return, I'll introduce you to a young mother who, like the rest of us, thought it could never happen to her. Maria wants to tell you her story because she wants to save your life, if it's the last thing she does.
When I found out I was HIV positive, I had said to my husband, well, me and the baby found out that we have AIDS, and he just looked at me and laughed.
Nestled in the wine country of California live a very special group of people. Here at Starcross, a clear and simple existence is found. But the spiritual lifestyle at Starcross has taken on an unusual commitment to children born with the AIDS virus.
We first thought about the needs of babies with the AIDS virus when we saw something on television. It was in February of 1986, and we had just adopted a little, very healthy boy, and something came on the television, showed us a picture of a little boy in a very large hospital ward on the East Coast, and the statement was that he had no place to go. There were no families to take him because he had the AIDS virus. And it just struck us that this was wrong. And we began thinking if there wasn't something we could do ourselves and perhaps to encourage others to open their homes and their hearts to children like this.
Brother Toby McCarroll is a Christian monk and the author of books on the process of spiritual healing. He has been a parent, guardian, and godfather to 3 generations of young people. Today, along with Sister Marty and Sister Julie, he's making Starcross a home of love and understanding for children with AIDS.
The most important thing about children with the AIDS virus is that they're not sick kids. 90% of the time, they're very healthy kids. And they have a right to play with sunbeams and kittens and learn to laugh, to know their love, and to have all the other things that go to making them realize that they're a unique part of creation.
This is the first child with the AIDS virus to live at Starcross. Her mother was an IV drug user who has placed her child in the care of the monastery. Since these scenes were filmed, 2 more children with the AIDS virus have come to Starcross. With the help of volunteers, the monastery will eventually be home to a total of 5 children with AIDS. The interest and love that Starcross has for children with AIDS does not stop with infants. Brother Toby is currently working on a book to be called Morning Glory. It is a work he hopes will inspire many to come to grips with the disease, teenagers included.
Originally, the sense was that this was an alien disease that would happen to other people, never to me, never to my family, never in my school. And now we're gradually coming to realize that there won't be a family, a school, a community, any place in the United States that isn't going to be affected with AIDS. And so we're starting to pull together. And we're asking the right questions. We're trying to get the right answers. Education is the only immunization we have.
For now, this baby lives in a loving and caring home. But when asked of her future, Brother Toby says there are really 2.
One is a day at a time. And that's the way we have to relate to her. Then she has a kind of long-range future, which is not very promising. She will not live a long life. But the important thing is she is living a life. And we are going to see that she gets as much out of that life as it's possible for her to get. And we will try to encourage people in other parts of the country to visit us or to ask about what we're doing and to do the same sort of thing in their own communities. It's very simple. We're not doing anything special. We are simply taking care of a baby. I think that the ultimate right of any child is not to die among strangers.
Your mercy is our most superior in every generation. You have shown the strength of your arm. You have scattered the proud in their conceit.
By example, Starcross is teaching us that it is as much a time for learning as it is for caring. But learning the truth about AIDS in our big cities can be far more complicated. Where AIDS once preyed primarily on homosexuals and IV drug users, the virus has now found its way into the young heterosexual community. We recently met this woman who asked us to mask her identity and whose life is now chilling evidence that what young people don't know about the disease can kill them. Here's what we found some young people think they know about AIDS and what one of their peers can teach them.
It seems as though AIDS is confined to homosexuals or bisexuals, and none of us are in that category, so we feel that we really don't have that much to fear, because there hasn't been a single reported case of heterosexual transmission of AIDS, and kind of makes us not consider it such a big risk.
I feel that if me and my baby had did something to deserve or get this disease ourselves, if I went out and shot dope or I was bisexual, whatever, I could understand it better. But for me to get this disease from a creep, a man that was supposed to love me and give me the world, and all he gave me was AIDS, I feel it's very unfair. I feel it's very unfair.
I don't think teenagers have taken a considerable step to trying to avoid AIDS. I think AIDS just seems so far away. It seems like such a not a possibility that teenagers haven't really changed that much.
Before I was told I had AIDS, I never even thought about it. I used to see billboards or something on Eyewitness News or something like that, and I just like shun it off, like, well, this is never going to happen to me or anybody in my family, so I don't want to even hear about it. And I just never really realized that there was something like AIDS out there until it hit home, and then when it hit home, it hit hard.
Somebody was just diagnosed as AIDS victim. Boy, I'll tell you, what a shock. I think it's hard to say, yeah, well, I know how they feel, because how can anybody really know how that person feels? Obviously, the physical pain, the emotional distress is unbelievable, probably enough to make many contemplate suicide.
I had to be admitted into a hospital. After I was diagnosed, I just felt that life wasn't worth living, so the doctors felt that it was best for me to be put in a hospital in a psychiatric ward for my own protection and my baby's protection, because like I said, my first reaction was put a pillow over her face and blow my brains out.
The person is basically socially ostracized in society today. They'll probably lose their job. Their friends probably won't want to be around them. And society basically, you know, blackballs that person into oblivion.
As far as friends are concerned, I had a girl that was supposed to be my best friend, and when she found out that I had AIDS, she never came to my house anymore, never called me. She's afraid, you know, even talking to me, she's going to get sick. Family members. I have one particular family member that don't even want to be in the same room with me. He's afraid that he breathes my air, he's going to get AIDS. And I love him very much, but there's nothing you can do to let him know that that's not going to happen.
Well, at my age group, I think I would be more worried about getting someone pregnant rather than getting AIDS. You know, they're trying to scare us into, you know, worrying about AIDS right now in our school, trying to get us to take programs and everything, but you know, I don't worry too much about it. You know, I don't think it'll really hit our area and the people I spend my time with.
I think that a lot of guys and girls that I know have what they say, go on the, you know, they're on the wagon now. You know, they're not as crazy nuts, and they're not like one-night stands as much as it used to be.
I think that people or teens are still having sex loosely, even with the scare of AIDS.
I don't know if they've decreased in their sexual activity, but I'm sure they're more careful and picky right now in choosing their partners, more selective.
The one sexual encounter, that could be the end of my life, but, you know, that's the chance that, you know, everybody takes. I'm not running around jumping in the sack with everybody, but, you know, I choose my partners carefully.
It's wrong. That one time matters. Use a condom. For yourself and your partner's safety, use a condom. Don't play games. Because this disease is not something that you laugh at. It's serious, it's real, it's here, it's a killer. Help yourself and help your partner. Don't play games.
I really think that now, you know, asking people before you sleep with them about their sexual history and whether or not they do have AIDS is becoming more acceptable in that sense. So, you know, I don't think you're out of line if you pick up somebody and before you go to bed with them you say, you know, do you have AIDS?
There's no more free love. This isn't the 60s anymore. There's no more free love. Take precautions. If you gotta have sex, do it the right way. Use a condom. Stay away from drugs, and just try to do the right thing for yourself. Don't wind up like me. Innocent, but not innocent enough.
We came to Cincinnati to ask which of these well-known burgers cost less.
So he had AIDS. This son of a Baptist minister wanted to talk to us because of his firm belief that it will be young people with AIDS that healthy kids really listen to.
I feel or have felt comfortable with the fact that I probably came in contact with this virus when I was 18 years old. I was 22 when I was diagnosed. I'm 24 now. I was diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma, and AIDS. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 11 other morbid conditions. I accepted the cancer immediately. You know, that was something that had to be dealt with right then.
What was that easier for you to deal with?
But good people get cancer. You know, cancer can happen to anyone, you know.
But not AIDS.
And at the time, the social connotations with AIDS were that you were a bad person, only bad people, or only the slime of society got AIDS. I mean, I was a decent person, so therefore, even for myself, it took some time to process the fact and accept that I'd been in contact with a disease that does not care about your race, your religious preference, your sexual preference, or really have anything to do with your value as a person. Went from 180 pounds to about 116 pounds. They started massive chemotherapy, you know, which I lost my hair. The chemotherapy was done both through my veins and in my spine, directly in my spine, which is called intrathecally. During that process, there was an accident that caused damage to my leg. Also, in my spinal column, a nerve was damaged. The chemotherapy was so strong, the tumor breakdown caused other vital body organs to shut down, including my liver and my kidneys. And they just could not process the waste materials that were coming out, the breakdown of the tumors. I was in ICU. There's a period of time that I don't remember. Was moved from Dallas to my family's home, my grandmother, etc., in southern Missouri. And I basically went home there to die. You know, I had chosen that I did not want to die in the clinical environment. You know, and at that time, I was told there was no real other possibilities. So, you know, I've had several amazed doctors that are still amazed, you know, that I'm alive. But as far as an expert goes, I am an expert in knowing the basic facts and how it affects the lives of young people. And because I am one. For one instance, a young man said, well, a group of guys was telling about somebody that caught AIDS from a toilet seat. Now, we know that that's not possible. But still, they're hearing their classmates or their friends say these things. It makes them wonder. Anytime you go through something new, you know, you're not always sure that you're doing things right. So I think that to protect themselves, a lot of them have chosen to stay ignorant. You know, we can do whatever we want as long as we have a condom. Now, that's some of them. That's not all of them. Others think that condoms don't do anything. You know, why bother using them? Because it only happens to gay people, and I'm only sleeping with 8 straight women, you know. So it's not going to happen to me. You can say no and stop to a lot of things, but your hormones keep producing, you know. There is the need to explore that or understand that side of you that's developing, that, you know, that's new. A lot of it's new.
And sex does happen in high school.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's happened in schools, you know, at school functions. Plans are made for sex in school, outside of school. You know, it's like, I'll meet you at, and then we'll go do this and run around, so on and so forth. Yeah, sex is very prevalent in our high schools, whether we like it or approve of it or condone it or not. It does happen. So I think it's important that we educate full cycle, every aspect of it. The clinical, as in what the AIDS virus is, what part of our blood supply that it affects, even education about probably the warning signs, and that, as well as safe sex. And even though it crosses over into moral issues, it can be expressed that you don't have to condone sexual behavior in adolescence before marriage, but that they know what could happen or what precautions they need to take, or that it's not just the one person they're sleeping with, but all the people that that person has slept with. And I think I would tell them to try to get the facts and overcome their own personal fears, because if they are well educated, if they educate themselves, which will probably, you know, it's an effort to educate yourself, then they can prevent this from happening to them. You may not be an IV drug abuser. You may be heterosexual. But if you're practicing unsafe sexual behaviors, your partner, how do you know that everyone that your partner's been with has been following the same guidelines? So therefore, I think that they need to really understand what sexual and moral and behavioral responsibility is. I think that's what I would encourage them to learn.
Living in a community that understands people with AIDS, like Bill Travis, is some of the best medicine in fighting fear of the disease. Back in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a group of parents got together and produced this pamphlet. It wasn't very big, but it was a significant start to educating themselves, their community, and their children about AIDS.
The tough part about the whole thing is that in order to talk to your kids about AIDS, you have to talk about sex, which is difficult enough in itself. So my own experience of broaching the subject was that it was very discomforting, and it wasn't easily done.
Our concern for our children's safety is more important than how we acted in our time. And our parents acted differently than we did, and their parents probably acted differently in some way than they. So we each act appropriate to our time.
What we had to deal with in our sexual experimentation was, am I going to get pregnant, or am I going to get some venereal disease? What our children have to deal with is death. You know, it's a different game. You can't just say, well, okay, I did it, so therefore you can do it. You know, when you're talking about something as final as dying from AIDS.
I have a 15-year-old brother, and he doesn't take me seriously when I say, you're going to die. You know, and it puts a whole different connotation on the conversation because he doesn't believe it. You know, they think that it's one more plot to get them to stop them from sleeping with somebody else or stop them from experimenting. You know, it's we against them again. You know, only we're on the other side this time. We're the established or establishment.
I was surprised by the information that we got about how lethal AIDS was and all the ways to contract it and how it might have extended through a chain of sexual partners. And it just makes it very frightening that a very innocent kind of experimentation can turn into death. So, yeah, there are two distinct messages in how it's really puts you at odds. How do you bring your kids forward in a civilization that's advertising sex, and at the same time tell them to hold their horses? It's dangerous.
Miniskirts and AIDS.
Yeah.
You know, that sums it up right there.
The point is that there isn't any reason that we can't lose sight of abstinence either. It's not a very popular position to take, but as you said, we lived through the sexual revolution. I must not have been in uniform because I was able to get through that without participating to the limits some did, and so I feel very comfortable in recommending that there isn't any reason that one can't live a full life without waiting.
Part of it is that you recognize that teenagers are nearly autonomous human beings, and they are going to do what they're going to do no matter what their parents say. So one thing is to start earlier, when they're 8, 9, and 10. For another thing, you've got to recognize that if they're going to do it, then you've got to give them the tools to be safe.
That was the tone that we all agreed on, that we wanted to strike in the brochure, too, was at least have an open dialogue, at least begin that.
Yeah.
So that when they come to the moment of choice, they've at least had the background, that they'll make the choice they make, but not blindly.
We didn't want to scare the children such that we create a whole new paranoia or a whole new psychology of problems that children have in regards to sex. Right. You know, how do you have this discussion with love and openness without turning them into a phobia, a sexual phobia? You know, and that's where Vince's point about abstinence comes up too, is that that's a very real alternative and a healthy alternative. You know, you don't have to decide now. You can say no. You can say no to drugs. You can say no to sex.
One of the main purposes of the brochure was to create an opening for parents and children to engage in conversation about the subject, so that not only could they be educated about AIDS, but also be in the sort of relationship where children would feel free to make the choice themselves, and not for parents to dictate to them what they should and shouldn't do, but rather for the children to be well enough educated so that they could make the decision themselves.
I think the climate is slowly changing, and what we wanted to do with the brochure was just prod a little corner of that and say, move along. you know?
We didn't want it to be a position because then people either had to agree or disagree. It was a tool for them to use. And we thought that that would make the biggest impact.
AIDS is a subject which I think a lot of people think of as not being close to them, and so that it's easy for them to try and avoid it. People avoid diseases. They avoid anything that'll harm them. People naturally attempt in life to reduce the risk. And addressing AIDS is to not reduce the risk, but to address it head on.
I don't know, when you're 15 and you're cute and all the girls think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, you know, you're not going to die. You know, it's a mixed message. On one hand, sex is power and sex is love and sex is attention. And we're coming across with the message that you may be sleeping with the Grim Reaper.
So bottom line, it's let's talk to our kids, let's communicate, let's get the relationship, let's use the relationship that we've got.
You know me. Of course you do. I'm the guy who sells you quality carpet without the quality price. Something I've been doing for over 40 years here at Carpetland. We have incredible Mannington hard surface flooring with JT88 protection, never wax, no stains. Plus, our visualizer lets you try the floor you like before you buy it. With things like this, it's no wonder everybody knows me. Carpetland has Mannington in 7 locations to serve you.
Look out, the window! Wow, great catch!
It's Phil Rizzuto and the Money Store. Loans as low as prime rate. Come on in, I'll tell you all about it. Now homeowners can get second mortgage loans with fixed rate as low as today's prime rate of 9%. You may get quick approval right over the phone.
That's good, huh?
It sure is. And ask about the Money Store sponsored MasterCard. Call your local toll-free number, 1-800-221-9000.
You deserve the freshest meat in town. Cut just the way you like it. That's what you get when you shop at Thriftway.
Save on full shank half ham, only 89 cents a pound. You save 40 cents a pound. Pick up some Coles, brat, or Mets, only $1.49 a pound. You save 50 cents a pound. And fresh grade A fryer thighs or drumsticks, 79 cents a pound. You save 30 cents a pound. Thriftway, an official sponsor of the Cincinnati Bicentennial.
Have yourself a Thriftway day.
Something new is in the air at Pizza Hut. Introducing hand-tossed traditional pizza. A pizza that's taking off with a crust that's perfect. Not too thick, not too thin. And reaching new heights with a special blend of mozzarella, cheddar, and Monterey Jack cheeses. New hand-tossed traditional pizza landing in a neighborhood near you. Go ahead. Test flight a bite today.
Pizza Hut, making it great.
It's easy to get a kid's attention by scaring him, but fear only instills distrust and misunderstanding. In order to get our young people to listen and comprehend the facts about AIDS, we must not frighten them. Rather, as parents, we must become the most educated we possibly can be before we sit down with our children and discuss AIDS. Yes, AIDS could become a monster of an epidemic, and that is scary. But we have the chance of stopping this monster from running amok through the lives of our kids by teaching them not to just fear AIDS, but to understand the disease. We must teach them not to fear people who have AIDS, but to understand their special needs. And we must teach them that it is extremely important to develop their relationships with others intellectually as well as physically. In tandem with health education classes and straight, honest discussions between parents and their children, we can beat the fear of AIDS, dispel the myths, and begin to understand the realities.
Probably the most broad-based mobilization against the AIDS epidemic has taken place here in San Francisco. And the effort is not aimed just at the city's large gay population. It's also directed towards the young people of the Bay Area. A national authority on teenage sexuality and sexually transmitted diseases in young people is Dr. Mary Ann Schaefer of the University of California at San Francisco. Dr. Schaefer says that the figures on teenagers with AIDS can be misleading.
When you look at AIDS statistics, don't be fooled.
because AIDS, the virus, may infect you now, but it may take 2 to 7 years or more before you find out you have AIDS, the syndrome. And that means that if an adolescent is having sex and gets infected with the virus at 17, that he or she may not know about it until they're in their early 20s. And if you look at statistics about AIDS, it's borne out. There are probably, maybe between 100 and 200 cases now of AIDS among adolescents that have been reported to date in 1987. If you look at young people between the ages of 15 to 19 years, if you look between 20 and 24 years of age, it's almost 10 times that amount. So probably what's happening is that some of this, at least some of this, is acquired during adolescence but doesn't show up till later. Most adolescents are getting AIDS or at risk for AIDS by sexual activity. Among adolescents in the United States, about 70% of them have had sexual intercourse by age 19 years. The average 16-year-old, that means about 50% of 16-year-olds in the United States have already had sex as well. We also know that young people in general do not use effective contraception. For example, we know that both boys and girls report using a condom less than 20% of the time they have sex, and that's our major way of protecting from sexually transmitted diseases and AIDS, is using a condom. There are more sexually transmitted diseases among teenagers, sexually active teenagers, than any other age group, when you control for the fact that half of our teenagers aren't even sexually active.
And this is not just San Francisco that we're talking about.
It's not just San Francisco. This is in urban centers in the United States. What's interesting, though, is that most of these young people don't know they have an infection because they're asymptomatic. They have no symptoms. And so as far as they're concerned, they're healthy, and they're going to go about their sexual activity with abandon.
What are the parents' responsibilities in this whole picture?
I think that it's very important for parents to feel comfortable and to know, first of all, you've got to know about sexually transmitted diseases and AIDS and know that many young people are having sex. Okay. Second thing is that you do need to talk about what's going on with your youngster early on, so that all of a sudden at 15 you aren't thrown in a room together and start talking about the birds and the bees, and they probably know more of the biology than you do. So I think that this has to be developmental all along, very early. You don't talk about AIDS to a 5-year-old. It's inappropriate. But you can talk to a 5-year-old about how you get a cold and how you can give somebody else a cold and how that happens. So that by age 7, you might talk a little bit more about, well, you know, pretty soon your body's going to be changing, and babies are in mommy's stomachs and so forth, and daddies are involved in that. So by age 10, you can actually start much more about the anatomy and start talking a little bit more about responsibility of relationships. That you know, if you do get involved with someone, certain things may happen. There's certain things. Talk about what love means, what responsibility means. You bring this in gradually, and not just around sexual activity, about living in a household together, and it's your responsibility to do the dishes. So these things become more and more apparent. I think, though, around 10, it's just about middle school age, it's extremely important to become very clear messages about what things are. I think people have to know how people get pregnant, how they don't get pregnant. I think they have to know about how you get sexually transmitted disease, how you don't get sexually transmitted disease. This is where the kids become a little more capable of understanding cause and effect.
What about the role of the schools? Where do they fit into the whole picture of education, sex, and AIDS?
There are young people that don't have guidance, and because the families cannot, for some reason, provide it. And therefore, I do feel that the schools, because the parents across the board have not done their jobs, have to take over that responsibility of educating youngsters about sexual activity, sexually transmitted diseases, and so forth.
Someone who has the disease, who can spread it to someone else, and in some cases doesn't show any of the symptoms of the disease. That's possible. That's possible. And especially since a person could be exposed to it, if you might be exposed to it today, right, and you will feel fine. And people say, well, geez, I might have gotten exposed to AIDS, and what's going to happen is that you're going to start looking for symptoms, and you're going to worry about yourself, and you know what? Nothing's going to happen. And nothing will happen for 6 months, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you're going to think you're fine, right? But maybe 6 years down the road, you might get the disease. That's the problem with it. They can't just find someone who has it and the next day test them for it and find they have it. It'd be much easier to work with, but they're not able to do that yet.
The teaching of AIDS in the classroom is becoming more and more commonplace. At this high school in Manhattan, AIDS has been a regular part of the health education curriculum since early 1986.
How many of you can honestly say your parents sat you down and told you about the facts of life, and more specifically, what to do, what not to do, etc.? Really, true, honestly, raise your hands. How many people got that kind of lecture and help at home? 1, 2, 3, 4. Put your hands down. How many did not? Raise your hands. Okay. Okay. Important to see. All right. So therefore, the bulk of you had not had the opportunity that John did to get some information at home. By the way, another question, I'm making you think a little here. If your parents did do that tonight, you came home and they sat you down and gave you a lecture tonight, all right, how many of you honestly think your parents know enough to be exactly accurate about all the facts? How many think your parents know enough to really be sharp and give you all the facts accurately? Raise your hand. Hands down. How many people think they probably wouldn't get all the facts right? Okay, so we have some. What are we saying here? Someone help me. What are we saying with these two questions?
What is important, though, is that it can't be done in one classroom or one lecture by doctor or nurse so-and-so. That you really need to develop a cohesive program from day one in school that talks about disease or health or families or responsibility or love or whatever your community feels is justified. But some basic facts that start with day one at school and gradually build in a program so that by the time they reach junior high, you can be more explicit and more exacting on what you talk about around how people get pregnant, how you prevent disease, and so forth. To the point eventually in certain schools where it's appropriate even to provide services for youngsters around reproductive health because they're not going to get it anywhere else. If you take a look at the way relationships are presented, and I think the media does have some responsibilities, both positive and negative here, a youngster perceives that what sex is now is you meet someone, you kiss, and the next thing you see is they're in bed together having sex. What they don't realize is you don't see development of a relationship. You certainly don't see anything about contraception. And responsibility towards the other person is never built into this kind of programming in general. Now, adults understand the differences, but children don't. And so if all they see is the kissing and then in the bed, they think maybe that's what I should be doing. Peers, too, see the same thing. So these youngsters have often myths about that's what you do. You just kiss and, you have sex, and everyone feels that. What happened to petting? I don't know where it went, or just touching and kissing and hugging. That used to be a great form of contraception in the past. It's not very popular right now, I don't think. And maybe we need to become realistic and bring that back. There's a lot of, we call them raging hormones. There's a lot of sexual energy out there, and we have to redirect it in a safe way.
Already have in place AIDS awareness programs and confidential testing centers. You can get their number by calling directory assistance. If you live in a small town or would just like information about AIDS on a more personal level, we suggest you call the National AIDS Hotline. Its toll-free number is 1-800-342-AIDS. That's 1-800-342-AIDS. There are also many videos being produced about AIDS and its prevention. The best that we have seen is this one, produced by the American Red Cross. Called Beyond Fear, it discusses the virus, its victims, and the impact of the disease on the community at large. Beyond Fear is available through your local Red Cross chapter on a free loan basis. For the past hour, we've seen that AIDS is a pretty frightening disease with no vaccine and no cure. But we've also seen that there's reason for hope because we can prevent AIDS today with education. Come here, baby. Come here. Here's what that education is all about. This is my little Katie, and as she gets older, her mother and I will have to tell her about sex, about drugs, and about AIDS. Won't be much fun, and not even very pleasant, but it will be absolutely essential. If Katie and all her children are to grow up to have a safe and healthy future, well, then we'll all have to teach our children well.
Thank you, Max, and thank all of you for watching. We hope that this program has better equipped you and your children with the kind of information necessary to open the lines of communication and understanding about AIDS. Take the time to use any of the resources offered earlier in your efforts to keep this hideous disease away from your family and your friends. This station is committed to keeping you informed not only of the ongoing search for a cure for AIDS, but in the ongoing campaign to arm you with the proper educational information as well. We encourage young people to start asking your parents questions about AIDS. And we encourage parents to take the time to listen, to understand, and to respond to those questions with the right information. Together, we can do as much to stop the spread of AIDS now through education as can years of medical research. My career in professional basketball taught me many things, but nothing I learned was perhaps more important than knowing that the best offense is a strong defense. The same applies to the battle against AIDS. If we're going to beat this disease, we must come out strong in the first period and lead all the way. If you're committed to this game plan, then I want you on my team, and together we will win the war against AIDS. For a healthy and productive future for all of us, it is a war we must win. I'm Julius Irving. Good night.